So you can see our theme this year is grit, and we had a long way, our process to come up with this. And we were thinking about all the different characteristics that our boys want, or what we want our boys to have, and what it takes to be successful. And we really came to think that this would be a great thing for us to carry forward to our chapters this year. In looking at it in combination with the new curriculum that we're doing, we really settled in on that word resilience. And I think that what we'd like to do is teach you and teach your boys how to be more resilient so that they can be successful as they move on to their 20s and 30s. And getting ready for our presentation today, we knew what our topic was, and we knew that we were going to go this direction, but we didn't really have a speaker lined up until just a few weeks ago. But we got very, very lucky, and we are, sometimes my board will say this, they don't know how it all happens, but it just comes together, and this was the perfect storm. We got the perfect speaker, we have the perfect topic, so we're very, very excited about it. Caroline Adams-Miller is our speaker today, and she has really done a phenomenal amount of research and work on grit and goal setting as you go through life, and talks a lot about what authentic grit is, what good grit is, what bad grit is. And so she is going to be presenting a great speech for us today. She is an author of 7 books, and we are selling some of those books out in the lobby. She graduated magna cum laude from Harvard and then did her master's at University of Pennsylvania in applied positive psychology. She is recognized by the media. If you look up on our website, she's been and spoken to amazing groups all over the country, and is just a great person. She is a master swimmer and a mom of, 3 kids, adult children, 4? 2 boys. Oh, 3, okay. 3 children, 2 boys, 1 girl. And we would love to welcome Caroline today to come join us. So.
Can I stay? I have never seen anything like that hat parade. I want to stay. Do you see all the colors on my slide? Any of you got close to me, 10 different colored fingernails? This is how I live. Those hats, I want to tell you, it reminded me of that Dr. Seuss book, Dog Party. How many of you have read Dog Party? Oh my God, I want to talk to all of you. How did you get the lights going and the hat? I stopped thinking about who to vote for. You all win. You all win. And I want to stay. So thank you for having me. Every now and then I get honored simply by virtue of the invitations I get. And this is one of the times that I think I'm always going to remember, because in speaking to Pam, I think I literally got hired a week or 2 ago. Because I was in, where was I last night? I was at the Gaylord Texan, and I was speaking to a healthcare company, and that's wonderful, and I love their mission. However, this is an extraordinary mission. You all are part of something so extraordinary. But what Pam has done awes me. I mean, and that's when I talk about this word awesome. When are things awesome? This is awesome. I mean, to come up with an idea in 2001 and to grow to this, and to have a mission that's changing the lives, particularly of our sons, who really, really need this kind of mother-son bonding. I'm just in awe. So I want to thank all of you for even having me on your stage to talk to you, because I think that what you're doing is extraordinary. I wish something like this had been in the Washington, D.C. area when my sons were growing up. So thank you for inviting me, and thank you, Pam, for starting this extraordinary organization with hats and bells and whistles, and oh my God, you guys have fun on top of everything else. So I only have 45 minutes, and I talk fast, and I'm going to talk fast because I have a lot to say today. Some of it may be a little bit unexpected, because I think a lot of this is about, what can we give our sons, and we worry so much as mothers, and I'm a mother. We worry so much about everybody else, about meeting the needs of our children, our spouses, our communities, our aging parents. I mean, I think we're always on call. But I want you to think about yourselves today, and I'm going to hit you between the eyes with some facts that have really got me troubled. My next book is about women and grit, because when women come together in the right ways for the right causes, we change history. It's undeniable. But there's something historic and very awful happening right now to middle-aged women that we really need to pay attention to. But I'd like to start with this word awesome, because this is the most overused word in our culture right now. It frankly means nothing in the way it should mean something, because I went to speak at a company a couple years ago, an international company, and one of their performance review categories was awesome. And everyone was getting it, and nobody was really meeting the achievements of what it means to be awesome. And it concerns me because when I think about awesome, I think about what really awes me, what causes me to want to stand up, you know, give a standing ovation. And those are things like standing for the national anthem, standing for a no-hitter in baseball, standing because someone has done something extraordinary, standing up for something like this. That's awesome. But we're finding that this generation is not awestruck the way we used to be for all kinds of reasons. I mean, one is they're not in the presence of greatness as much, partly because we've cut funding for the arts and for music. They're not out in nature the way previous generations were. They're staring at screens. We've got big screen addiction problems, particularly with young men. And so they're not really seeing excellence at its absolute best for all kinds of reasons. So I'd like you to think about awesome a little bit differently by the time you walk out of here, or by the time I'm done. But that's a word that I really do think that we need to think very carefully about when we use it. What does it mean? Because I want it to mean something different. But what I want to start with is we are in the midst of something that's never happened before in our history in the United States, and that is middle-aged women are dying earlier than previous generations. This has never happened. This is unheralded. And when we look really closely at these numbers, why are we dying earlier than our mothers and our grandmothers' generation? What's happening? It's stunning. It's stunning. And we will not be able to give anything to anyone. Our sons, our spouses, our families, our communities, the people we love, our friends, until we get right at this problem. And what we're finding is that middle-aged women are dying earlier now because of diseases of despair. What is diseases of despair? It's depression, alcoholism, prescription drug abuse, suicide, depression, eating disorders. Middle-aged women are in a crisis. And so I want you to learn something about what it takes to become awesome in your own way, because you can't give away something you don't have. You can't. And so as women, we have to find ways to have lives of passion and purpose. What do we wake up for? What is it that lights us up? I've found over and over in my work as an executive coach, but now as a consultant and an author and a researcher, that when I ask a lot of women what their top 5 pleasures are, what brings you joy, what are your biggest goals, who do you want to be in the future, who is your best possible future self, they go blank. They don't know. We've stopped dreaming. As women, we often drop our friends and exercise and things we love to the bottom of the list. And that's why we're seeing this U-shaped curve really across the world, too, where women slide into despair at middle age. And we can't get it by just making sure other people have what they need. It's not going to work. So my plea to you today is to pay attention to some of the science that we do know now from positive psychology that I believe can infuse you in a new way if you pay attention to yourselves, because you have to. This is a national imperative. I've never seen numbers like I'm seeing right now. The Centers for Disease Control has tracked with unbelievable specificity what's happening to us. And I see it in my friends, I see it in my acquaintances, I see it everywhere. So what I want you to do is walk out of here thinking about yourselves and thinking about, how do I become the best possible person I can be? And so I come to you with an evidence-based perspective. My 5th book, Creating Your Best Life, my 7th book, Getting Grit, are both outside. But that is why I'm here, is because when I went back to school 13 years ago to get a master's degree in the science of positive psychology, what I very quickly found was there are all these theories stuck in academia that nobody knew about. For example, goal-setting theory. A lot of people were using goal setting in their businesses, in their lives, whatever, but what I found is nobody knew there was a very well-validated theory called goal-setting theory. And so I became the first person to write an evidence-based goal-setting book, which still stuns me. 2009, the book came out, and I wrote about how does the science of goal-setting connect with the science of happiness. So one of the most important things that came out of that book is a finding that is a slam dunk finding that nobody knew about until late 2006. And this really upended a lot of what we believe about what does it take to have a meaningful life, a flourishing life. And what we found is that all success in life is preceded by being happy first. I grew up in Washington, D.C., believing that if I achieved certain accolades, if I had what I call the bumper sticker virtues, you know, if I played Beethoven's Concerto No. 1 in C major by the age of 13, you know, that would make me happy, or if I swam the right swimming times, or if I was class president, if I got the right SAT scores, all the things that as parents we often want for our children, thinking that that will make them happy, that will give them this great life, when in fact I had all of those things. And I got worse and worse, and I'll tell you my story in just a moment. But what we now know is that we don't succeed in life until we're happy first. And there are a number of validated positive interventions that can uplift us to flourish. But that's the first thing you need to understand. In writing Creating Your Best Life, I found some interesting research that, again, was new. And what we now know is that the happiest people, really across, not just in the US, all over the world, and these are big, big surveys with thousands of people, what we find is that those people wake up every day to hard goals. Not easy goals, not low goals, hard goals. And these are often goals about serving others, not just about making ourselves happy, but about serving others. And what we're also finding is that in order to achieve those very hard goals, we have to have this quality called grit, which is now called the secret to success. So as a mother, let me tell you why that concerned me. As I watched my children growing up in Washington, D.C., I saw culture changing around them. I saw things that were unrecognizable to me, and I'll just start with our local playground. So I grew up in the same neighborhood that I'm in right now, and when I grew up, believe it or not, there were metal slides at this playground. And these metal slides got hot when the sun was out. I mean, it's just stunning to imagine what life was like 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And so, you know, when you went down this hot slide and your legs got hot, you might hit the ground and get like gravel in your shoes. I mean, again, unbelievable. Well, you know, now we've got wood chips, and the kids are bouncing off the wood chips, and they've got these plastic slides that nobody even cares about because you don't get any thrills. So what we're finding is that we've been bubble wrapping this generation in ways that has been incredibly counterproductive. We find that this particular generation of young adults is the least resilient generation we've ever had. They don't know how to sit with discomfort. They don't know what it's like to be told that they didn't get an A. They don't know what it's like to be told they're not awesome. And this isn't just my opinion. This is factual. This is what we're seeing. And so the college mental health systems are overrun with anxious, depressed young adults who have never had to sit with discomfort. We have parents coming in and scooping them up and fixing everything for them. Consequently, they're not learning what they're made of. They're not learning what their strengths are. Some of them don't even know what their goals are. They've been so programmed by us, their parents, to tell them this is what you need to do, that they have no opinions. At Stanford, the dean of students calls them like the something sheep, the perfect sheep. And you know, they just don't have opinions. And so as I watched my children growing up with these wood chips and these plastic slides, other things started to happen. Fun runs disappeared from the school. Why? Parents complained that their kids didn't win. You know, so that's enough reason to get rid of the fun run? Are you kidding me? And then the Department of Motor Vehicles took away parallel parking because it's too hard. It's too hard to learn how to parallel park anymore, you know? And so Then we have safe spaces. How do you like safe spaces, where the kids are, my daughter went to Brown University. And one of the most egregious examples of this happened while she was a student there. And she called me up. She's like, Mom, people I know are protesting against speakers coming on campus to debate topics. Like there's only one side to a debate, so people were protesting. I don't want this person on campus because I don't agree with them and I feel unsafe. So Brown University, the future leaders of America, are sitting in a dimmed room with goldfish, chocolate chip cookies, coloring books, and videos of puppies. These young adults, and this is happening everywhere. I want to tell you, this is everywhere. So we got a problem. We do have a generation that has not necessarily learned, unless they were very, very fortunate, to grow up in families often with military backgrounds, or they are lucky enough to have coaches and teachers who hold them to high standards, parents who don't scoop them up and fix things for them. But that, in and of itself, has become one of the biggest challenges facing corporate America. Do you know I go into companies where there are HR departments and they say they can't give performance reviews? Because one woman said to me, she looked absolutely stunned as I'm speaking about this, and she said, oh my God, this explains why this young woman burst into tears last week at her performance review when I told her she had met expectations. She said, that's the meanest thing anyone's ever said to me. I'm not making any of this up. I'm not making any of this up. And so what are we going to do? This is why GRIT is such an important initiative and why I want to unpack it for you. This is imperative because we've got terrorism, we've got real problems going on in the world that are streamed live all the time. Our kids are seeing challenges and tragedies. Turn on the television, it's terrifying. But this is really what they're growing up into, a world with challenges that many of us did not feel or see or hear about. They better be tough and they better be ready. When my kids went through college, 2 of my kids were Division I athletes, and I want to tell you, one of the biggest differences between their time and my time, because my husband and I were both varsity athletes at Harvard, is we only had American kids on our teams. My son, who was the captain of the University of Cincinnati swim team, 60% of his team was from Chechnya, Russia, France, Sweden. I mean, it's a global economy. Our kids have to know how to compete with the world. And so we can't make it safe for them. We have to learn resilience. And it starts with you. It starts with all of you, because this starts in the family. And so some of the standards that you're going to need to raise your children with may be unfamiliar, because I parented my children during the self-esteem generation. I was told I had to make them happy at all costs, because if they're happy, they'll be very successful, because they'll be so confident, and they'll have high self-esteem. So the research is in on that particular kind of parenting. Let me tell you what the findings are on that. When you just make your children happy, give them, you want an iPad? Let me go get it. Let's go right now and get you an iPad. They don't wait for anything. So what they found is that when you raise your children to just be happy and to feel no pain and to never really learn what your strengths are, only 2 things have occurred, and that's narcissists and sociopaths. So it is not a positive parenting approach. So I decided that I had to write a book about grit, just grit, because I had a chapter about it in Creating Your Best Life with the early findings. And then my friend and colleague, Angela Duckworth, who got a MacArthur Genius Grant Award for her research on grit, she wrote a book that hit #1 in 30 countries May 1st, 2 years ago. #1. Why? Because she put her finger on the pulse of something I think a lot of us know is missing in this world, that our kids are not as resilient, that great inflation is so pervasive. I tell you, I go and talk to companies, they don't even look at people's GPAs anymore because everyone gets A's. Totally inflated. They want to know, what's your character? What have you overcome? What are you made of? What are you willing to suffer for? And who have you helped? That's one of the most important questions. Who have you helped? And I interviewed a baseball coach who told me that he's having trouble just trying to recruit baseball players for his college team, because he said they're all being raised to be stars. They all have individual coaches, catching coaches, pitching coaches. He said they don't even know how to field a ground ball. They don't know how to throw from first to second. They need to learn to be part of a team. Who else have you helped in your life? What are you made of? So I decided I wanted to write a book about how do you get grit? What are the qualities of grit that all of us can learn? And I know from personal experience that grit is something that you're not born into. It's not your family necessarily. It's not your legacy. Now, I was born into a family of Olympic athletes. My great-uncles won 2 in the 1912 Olympics, and I think they're the first siblings ever to do that. So I grew up with those stories, which ended up being damaging. And I'll tell you my story right now, because you deserve to know why I'm here, why I'm passionate about it, and why this matters so very much to me above and beyond being a mother. And that is that 35 years ago, I nearly died. And I nearly died from bulimia. And I was shown how to be bulimic in my high school when I was 14 years old. I was a competitive swimmer. This was the 1970s. And it was really spreading quickly across the country. And we, there were these little articles in Teen Magazine or 17, whatever it was, how it was happening in all these sororities or, girls were doing it together. And I remember following 2 girls into a bathroom and hearing them purging their food after a lunch at my private girls' prep school in D.C., where my head was being stuffed with enough facts so I could get into the right college. And I hear them doing this, and I confront them when they come out. It's like, what's that thing you're doing? Is that this bulimia thing? And they said, yeah, don't tell anyone. It's our secret, It's our secret, and you can't do any harm to yourself. It's, you can, it doesn't really matter. But this other girl said it, and it's swimming, because she was a competitive swimmer. I can just go to swim practice after school. It doesn't really matter. And that was the day I signed my death certificate. That day I decided to go try it. I was going to try it. What girl doesn't want to eat all she can eat and then, not pay a price? The problem was that it is a disease of addiction, and I became deeply addicted to the point where I couldn't pull myself out. And that went on for almost 8 years. It cost me so much in terms of my health, my happiness, my friendships. Nobody ever figured out what I was doing because I looked very much like this. I looked very normal. But I was dying inside in this pursuit of perfection. And I kept thinking the next achievement is going to make me happy and I won't need this anymore. And the next achievement never did. So I get to Harvard and I find out that there were even more people with eating disorders. But I want to remind you that back then it was hopeless. Nobody got better. All we knew is that people died. Karen Carpenter died. People died. It was hopeless, completely hopeless. And I decided I wanted to live. So my last gasp attempt to try to, make it go away by changing something superficial was I asked this guy to marry me on our 3rd date because I thought, well, that'll solve it, And God only knows where that idea came from because you don't get engaged at 19 at Harvard University. I mean, I was like the dodo bird. It's like everyone just looking at me like, what are you doing? So I asked him to marry me because I thought marriage was a long sleepover. And I truly did. I thought it was a long sleepover, and I didn't have a lot of experience dating. And then I realized on our honeymoon in 1983 that this thing was still with me. So long story short, I hit my last bottom in 1984. And I found a way to get better because I finally had my own goals. I wanted to live for me, not for my teachers, my parents, my family, anybody else. It was me. And I began to ask myself, who do I want to be? What do I want to do with my life? And the first thing I wanted to do was get better and then turn around and help somebody else get better. Because I was told in my 12-step group, which is where I finally found somebody, one person who was in recovery. And because that one person was in recovery and said the sentence, my name is Betsy and I'm recovering from bulimia one day at a time, because she was there and said that sentence, I had hope. And because I had hope, I persevered and I got better. And I ended up writing the very first book by anybody who got better from bulimia. And that book became an international bestseller in 1988. And then I wrote the first book a few years ago by anyone who got to 25 years of recovery. But that's why I'm here, and that's why I'm talking about grit. Because as I learned about grit at the University of Pennsylvania, what I realized is that Angela Duckworth's research was showing that only half of your ability to be gritty is hardwired. Some people are less impulsive than other people. Some people are more patient. Some people are more optimistic. Some of that is hardwiring. You inherit that genetically. The other half, though, of your ability to be gritty is what you choose to think about and do every day, the habits that you build, the goals you set for yourself. And so as I'm sitting in the classrooms at the University of Pennsylvania, I'm doing a rewind in my brain, and I realized that I had talent and success. I had bumper sticker virtues right through bottoming out in 1984, and that was when I learned grit. That was when I was forced to cultivate the habits and behaviors that allowed me to become the role model I am today. And if I were to be taken tonight by some reason, my plane went down, the thing I know I've done is I've saved hundreds of thousands of lives because I simply spoke up, and I was an interrupter, and I said, I got better, and I'm not ashamed, and I'm going to talk about it, and I'm going to let you look at me and say, this is what recovery looks like. And so that's my mitzvah. That's what I've given back to the world. That's the thing I'm proudest of, and that's been my touchstone, because it now shows me that we can cultivate grit, and that is the spirit with which I wrote Getting Grit. I want everybody to learn this very important quality that we all agree has gone AWOL in our society. It just has. And so it's incumbent upon us as mothers and as women to learn how to be this ourselves, because I'm deeply concerned that my sisters, all of you, are struggling with diseases of despair. Not all of you, of course, but it's become so pervasive, I can't not acknowledge that many of you may be infused with hope for your children or others, but maybe not yourself. And I want to call that out today. So let's talk about, how do we cultivate grit? I have a definition for grit that's different from Angela Duckworth. So if you've heard of her or seen her, her TED Talk has 15 million views, 20, 30, I don't even know. But again, she hit a nerve. And her definition is passion and perseverance in pursuit of long-term goals, which basically means you have a big goal and you're a finisher. You finish. You get to the finish line. And so I really sat back and thought about, does that definition work for me? Does that work for the clients I work with, again, as a coach and a consultant? And what I realized is that it didn't. It didn't go far enough. And the kind of grit that I believe inspires best performance and elicits awe, if we're going to go back to awe, is what I'm calling authentic grit. And I believe Malala Yousafzai and the example she's set for young women around the world, everybody actually, is my example of authentic grit. So this is my definition. My definition is that it's still about doing hard things, okay? It's still about going outside your comfort zone, but you're doing it with your own goals. You're passionate. And why does passion matter so much? It has to be harmonious passion, not obsessive passion. It matters because when you set hard goals, you will have dark nights of the soul. You will fail. I failed over and over in my first year of recovery because I didn't even know how to feed myself. I didn't even know what a portion was. I had to go to restaurants and look at other people's plates to figure out what a portion was. It had been that long since I'd known what is a serving. Why would I know? Who knew? And so you have to have this passion because you will fail. And that's something a lot of women are very uncomfortable with, is failing. Not getting what you want, showing other people that you're vulnerable, that you need help. And so the passion that's baked into these big, hard goals is what allows us to get up and keep going and keep going and keep going. And I think the pivotal point for me in this definition is that you do have to take risks. None of us want to take risks. Risks are hard, but you know what? We do know from the research that regrets only come from the risks you don't take. Okay? We find that long-term, the things that people regret most are the risks that they were too afraid to take. In fact, the number one regret of people in hospice care is that they lived someone else's life. They did not live the life they wanted to live. They were too afraid. They played small. And so I do think that this last part of my definition is where it becomes meaningful from a legacy standpoint. You have to awe and inspire other people to become better. In some ways, you have to be uplifted. When you observe people with the right kind of grit, these are the people who, in just observing them, you are better because you witness their dignity, their self-regulation, their passion. They didn't need to get a trophy for just trying hard. I mean, when my kids left for college, my husband and I threw out 100 trophies, and they didn't even notice. They didn't even notice. The only ones they cared about were the ones that they were given that meant something, that they had worked for, that had something to do with their character. And so that's what authentic grit to me is all about, because when you have this quality, this passion, this ability to take risks, this ability to go out of your comfort zone, but in that process of having this kind of good grit, you're awing and inspiring other people. And as mothers, if you want your sons to have grit, this is who you have to be. There are only so many speeches you can give them that will help them, because you know what? The thing that matters most is they're watching you. They're watching you. Do you have passion? Are you pursuing something? Are you taking risks? Are you failing? How do you deal with failure? How in the world are your sons going to learn to be this person unless you're doing this yourself? And I'm telling you something, they won't and they can't. Because my children have recently reflected back to me, and they're 29, 25, and 23. They have begun to tell me their stories of me at my best. And every one of them has involved me picking myself up after a failure and doing something one step at a time. When I wrote Creating Your Best Life, I shut down my coaching practice for months because I knew this was my brass ring. If I did that book in 4 months, I would really have done something extraordinary for the world of goal setting. And I remember my kids were 16, 13, and 10. I had never left them alone. I was the mom in the carpool line. I ran a business from home. I was like Superwoman. But this was so important to me that I had to put my life on hold and go see if I could pull it off. Because we only get a few moments in life, and we call them inflection points, when we find out what we're made of. We find out what we're willing to fight for. I was willing to fight for this. So I enlisted this brigade of mothers to pick my kids up, to do whatever for 2 weeks at a time. I disappeared to the Delaware shore, and I wrote 18 hours a day. I was covered in hives. I was admitted to a hospital 3 times with migraines and vomiting. And they would say, "Are you under any stress?" And I'd say, "Oh, yeah, I'm writing a book on how to create your very best life." And it's like, okay, you know. But what was interesting was I remember calling home with mom guilt, like, how are my kids, eating? And my husband picks it up, and I say, "How's it going?" And he goes, "Everything's great." And I heard my daughter in the background saying, "We have no food." And that's kind of how it went. But you know what? I would say, "Great, go to McDonald's. I'll see you guys in a few days." And I'd hang up and I'd go back to it. So I remember when I came back, turned in the book, I called my agent and I said, "Ivor, I just redefined who I am to myself. I am bigger and better than I thought I was. I did it. I pulled this off." And when I got home, my daughter had a list of, she's road crew, a list of regattas, and next to it was how many of them I'd missed. And talk about a knife. And I missed my son, swimming in the ACC championships in Atlanta, his freshman year at the University of Maryland. But you know what? When that book came out in 2009, all 3 of my children were in the front row of the first reading at Barnes & Noble, and there was a standing ovation. That they were the first 3 to leap to their feet. And they were so proud of me, and that's what they're telling me these days, is you showed us how to go for something big and not be a quitter. And the same thing happened with Getting Grit. That book was rejected for 2 years by every publisher because they said, no one's going to buy a book on grit, other than Angela Duckworth's book. And I sent my kids every rejection letter. And I said, "I'm not quitting. I just wanted you to know that I had another disappointing rejection today, but I'm not quitting." Because we don't do enough of this. We don't show them our vulnerability. We don't show them what our passions are, what our goals are, if we even have them. But most of all, what I found in interviewing people for Getting Grit is if they don't hear and grow up around stories of failure and overcoming, there are no speeches you can give them that are going to make a difference. They are watching us. They're watching you. And I know as the mother of 2 boys, you are in many ways the most important figures in their lives. And it's up to you to role model this incredibly important quality of grit. So a few things. How am I doing on time? What's that? 10 more minutes. Okay. 11? Okay. All right. So here are the questions that I want you to really think. If they give me another 10 minutes, is that okay? Okay. Thanks. Okay. So, and give me a hat, too. I want a hat. Those of you who traveled with those hats, man, I'm so impressed. How did you get them on the airplane? Anyway, so what do you wake up for? This is a Japanese word, ikigai. And ikigai roughly translates into that which I wake up for. We find the happiest, longest-lived people are the ones who wake up for something, an ikigai. What do you wake up for? What pulls you out of bed in the morning? What is it that gives your life purpose and meaning? And it can't always just be your children, because they grow up, if we do our job, and leave. They do go at a certain point. What are the things that motivate and inspire you to make a difference? This is Alice Paul. I've spoken in so many women's groups. This is the reason why we have the right to vote. 100 years ago, this woman literally did whatever she had to do to push the issue of women having the right to vote. And what she did to lay down her life in many ways for this cause is truly extraordinary, and she's not celebrated enough. But we all need a reason to get up. And my ikigai is to get up and share my stories and to give people the proven scientific tools to help you all live your very best lives and have maximum chances to achieve them. So the next thing you're going to want to do is ask yourself, am I persisting or do I give up? Do I give up when there's a speed bump? You know, how long do I actually really try to make it happen? Do I turn over every rock? This story of this pilot, Tammy Jo Schultz, who successfully landed the Southwest Airlines flight, when the window blew out and the passenger was pulled out, to hear her nerves of steel as she relayed, you know, what was happening to ground control is so amazing to me. But what's even more amazing is the media has gotten her backstory. Her backstory is she grew up in New Mexico and she saw planes. There were air shows flying over where she lived. And she wanted to be a pilot. And in high school, when she was a senior, somebody came to talk to the school about becoming a pilot. And so she walks into this classroom, and there's only one woman, her, there, one girl. And the instructor looks at her and says, "Are you lost?" And she says, "No, I want to be a pilot." And he said, "Well, that doesn't happen. There are no women who fly big planes." And she didn't leave. She didn't leave. She got rejected from schools because she wanted to be a pilot and they wouldn't teach her. And finally, one school let her in and they trained her in how to fly planes. And she wanted to fly fighter planes, and she didn't give up on that dream. And she wasn't allowed to serve in combat, but she was allowed to train others. She married a pilot, and he says she's the finest pilot he knows. But what strikes me is that this is a woman who, no matter how many doors were shut, she did not give up because she had a passion that was bigger than her. And she thought, one day, maybe I won't be able to serve my country, but I will be able to teach other people how to fly. She took her big goal and turned it into a value that allowed her to give back. And then her moment came. Her moment came when she had to save lives. And the stories of how she greeted every passenger as they left, as they got off the plane, this woman's amazing. Talk about grit. This is a woman who awes me. Do you share your stories of failure? I think I've made my point, but this story went viral less than 2 weeks ago. University of Houston, a woman with 5 children. Her husband dies of cancer. She fights despair, suicide attempts, until a pastor says, "You know, you can't give up because God spoke to me last night. And God spoke to me and said, you need to go back and get your GED because you're going to be a lawyer one day." And because that woman believed in her, this woman went and got her GED. Her kids all pitched in. The oldest one served dinner when he heard his mother crying that he didn't know how she was going to keep going. He would take care of the little ones. And there's those signs speak to how they all helped their mother accomplish their goals. Now, do you think those are kids who are growing up seeing grit? Of course they are. Do you think this is going to infuse them with a passion and a purpose? Yes. We can't just give them speeches. We have to show them what it looks like. Do you have a Moai? Now, this is something that is so important to me because one of the things that is not talked about, the elephant in the room with women, is that women bully other women in unbelievable record amounts. In fact, the #1 bullies in the office are women. And we do this to each other. And I'll give you one quick story that just really got to me. Last fall, the Harvard and Yale women got together and started a salon series in the Washington area to bring in, big topics, and we would all get together and, talk about them. And so they announced their very first topic. The very first topic was women undermining other women, at which point a free-for-all started. Everyone tried to get in. The tickets ran out literally within seconds. And then there were just online petitions. Can we have satellite feeds? Can we have other meetings? And I got one of these Willy Wonka golden tickets. I got in. I got to go listen. And it's not like I didn't know this, because I've certainly been the victim of women bullies my entire life. It's just when you dare to stand out, when you're the tall poppy syndrome, people come in and try to cut you down. And they do it for all kinds of reasons. But the stories I heard of these really competent women trying to make a difference in the world, who had been bullied by other women, not just professionally, but personally, really showed me that in many ways we have this important reckoning going on. The hashtag #MeToo movement is very important. This is overdue. Watching the courage of those gymnasts in that Michigan courtroom and what they had to endure. And then they went out and they won the Olympic gold medal with this predator waiting for them in the training camp. I mean, it's unbelievable to me how strong we really are. But one of the things that we're not talking about is, are we really supporting other women? Are we supporting other women? And we need to have what is called in Japanese a moai. And what that translates into is a group that has your back. And so in Okinawa, Japan, when you're 5 years old, all the little boys and little girls go to the center of Okinawa, and there's a very solemn, sacred ceremony where bells are rung, and these little children pledge to have each other's backs for the rest of their lives. And they do. And this is a moai in Okinawa, Japan, featured in the book Blue Zones. These women are 103 years old, and they get together every night. They look in on each other every day to see how they're doing. And research has given us the one way to tell if somebody should be in our group, because I want women to wake up. Wake up to what's going on in your lives. 84% of women say they have frenemies, friends who are enemies. Why? Why do we do this? Why do we surround ourselves with friends who are enemies? The main reason that comes back is we don't want anyone to think we're not nice. We're not nice. Well, guess who we're not being nice to is ourselves. Because I know all the research on what happens when we're undermined like this, but I'll tell you, there's one way to tell if someone should be privy to your dreams and your goals and the things that are important to you that you're going to need grit to accomplish, is if you share your good news or your plans with another woman. The only one right way to respond that tells you if someone should stay or leave, be put in a container, or continue to have access to your goodwill, your energy, your own giving, is if they respond with curiosity and enthusiasm. And if they do not respond with curiosity and enthusiasm, you now have a very important piece of data, and I want you to think about that. So the next question I always get is, what if that person's in your family? And the answer is, it's always somebody in your family. Form a moai. And so one of the last things I want to leave you with, I just have a few more slides, and I promise I won't overstay my welcome here, is Shalane Flanagan won the New York City Marathon in October. She was the first American woman to win the marathon in 40 years. And that is remarkable, but that's not the most remarkable thing about her that we're now talking about. There's something called the Shalane effect. And what that means is that when she's a very elite runner, very talented, but she didn't want to train alone. So she invited other talented female runners to move to Portland, Oregon, and train with her, her competitors, right? The people she wanted to beat. She broke her pelvis, she had a long rehab, but she wanted to still be essentially a mother hen to these other talented women. And so they all trained together and uplifted and inspired each other, and then she went, and despite the broken pelvis and her history of injuries, she won this. But reporters went and looked at the backstory, and the backstory is what we're talking about now. And that is that when they looked at all of the runners who had gone to train with her in this little area, they found something they'd never seen before in sports, and that is that every woman who moved to Oregon to train with Shalane Flanagan has now done their best time. So these women have experienced what we call the heliotropic effect. Heliotropic effect is when you turn towards the sun. You turn towards people who give you life and light, who light you up, who make you feel hopeful and motivated and a sense of possibility. We all do this. Plants do it, animals do it, but we as people do it. The heliotropic effect dictates that we will turn towards people who motivate and inspire us. And this is also part of our work as mothers. Do we have the heliotropic effect on our sons, on others? When they're watching us, do they see us motivating and inspiring others? Do we even know what other people's goals are? Are we curious enough to ask? So a few last things I want to share with you. Not all grit is good, and this is another difference between my work with Angela. The worst kind of grit that I see is the overuse of grit and what I call stupid grit. And this is demonstrated by a man whose body is still at the top of Mount Everest. They cannot bring his body down. He's called Green Boots because they don't know who it is. But in mountaineering, it's called summit fever, when you're so drunk on getting to the top that you've got this goal and you stop listening to the Sherpas, you don't really care that the weather's changing, you're roped into other climbers, but you're not worried about their safety either. You have to get to the top. And so what we find in offices and life is when somebody is so arrogant that they don't have the humility to take in data from other people or the environment, that the situation has changed, you have to pivot. These are the people who have stupid grit, who refuse to change course. Don't have stupid grit. And the number one way to avoid stupid grit is to have humility. And humility is one of the most important qualities we see in grit. Another kind of grit that was just really an epidemic in our world is faux grit. You know, people faking their results so that someone else will think they're gritty. You know, that they've done hard work. In academia, we see all these people now faking their research so they can get a PhD. Our generation of millennials and young adults are infamous now for taking shortcuts. They want to be famous fast. They want to be CEOs fast. They want things to come to them instantly because they've been able to get things instantly. They haven't had to wait for much of anything. We navigate away from websites that don't open in 3 seconds. Can you believe that? I mean, if it doesn't open in 3 seconds, we're done. So we don't want to take shortcuts in an effort to have other people think we're gritty. And the last kind of bad grit is what I call selfie grit. And selfie grit, again, is a new thing in our society, is people who do hard things, but they tell you all the time that they did this CrossFit workout or they, you know, whatever it is, the humble brag stuff. So my poster child for selfie grit is the Navy SEAL Rob O'Neill, who decided that even though the Special Forces credo is the quiet professionals, he gave an interview to Esquire magazine. He said, me, 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 me. I shot Osama bin Laden, not anybody else. It was me. And so does that inspire anybody? No. One of the key things you find with grit is the right kind of grit inspires and motivates other people to be better people. And so my challenge to you today is, are you awing other people in the way in which you are living your life, in the way in which you're approaching big goals with passion, with purpose? Are other people awestruck by the ways in which you're living your life? Are they dumbstruck at times because of the courage and the patience and the dignity that you're displaying? Because if we want sons and other children to have grit, the right kind of grit, it starts with us, setting the example of being truly awesome. And why is that? I started with you can't give away what you don't have, but you also can't keep what you don't give away. So once you have this quality, once you have these little pieces, you will not be able to keep it unless you turn around and give it to someone else who doesn't have it. It is not about us just having what we want. It's about us making sure that we have the legacy effect. And I would not be alive today on this stage if that woman, Betsy, had not been February of 1984 at that meeting when she said, my name is Betsy and I'm recovering one day at a time from bulimia. She was there not because she needed to be there. She was there because she had been told she couldn't keep what she didn't give away. So my mission now is to carry on Betsy's legacy. You can't keep what you don't give away. Make sure you're giving away the ingredients that will make your sons the best men they can possibly be. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
That was beautiful.
Very nice. Thank you.